Red Dwarf, it's strange, it's come full circle because we did work at Shepperton, on M Stage Shepperton, which I'm thinking, I was looking at my notes, I think it was something like Series 3, where we were shooting on 35mm, and we did the Starbug landing, I think it was on the moon or a moon-like planet, so that's going back, I'm guessing, about 20 years. So I was part of the team, there was a group of us there that were working all together. I didn't like that one. So it's strange, it's like coming full circle all these series later. I've always been in visual effects model stuff, and it's interesting, with that line of tradition that the guys I work for, people like Derek Meddings, Jerry Anderson, so there's a definite link and there's a spirit there with Red Dwarf that I think both those people would be sympathetic to. You are sort of in that tradition of model effects, whatever, for TV series.
In order to cut the show to get running length and to get a rough cut with effects in, they'd been using some footage from series 3, 4, 5 and 6, and what they liked was the Starbug coming in and landing on the pads and the Starbug taking off again. So we discussed the possibility of building quite a large scale Red Dwarf hangar and pads, similar, not quite exactly the same as what we'd done for season 3, but something that was along those sort of lines. Eventually that evolved into that we would build the pad itself so that the physical model of the Starbug had something that it could physically land on, but the background would be put in as a digital matte painting to match the locations that they've been using and some of the sets that they've been using.
It's like being a magician, it's sleight of hand, and I think my greatest pleasure is when you jumble up effects, so it might be a matte painting, a model, it might be a bit of 2D, a bit of 3D, you jumble those up, you jumble scales up, so people aren't quite sure what you've done, and if somebody turns around and says, well, what effect? That's probably the greatest pleasure.
So we ended up building a pad in scale with the large Starbug model that Magic Camera Company had built. And I was able to get, having had Nick Cool on the Bazookoids, I was able to get Rocky, Alan Marshall, onto the Starbug pad with me. So from my point of view, it's been really nice because it means that myself, Nick and Rocky are now back on a show that we actually started on in our careers. And what Rocky has brought to the model of the Starbug pad is that he's gone back to a lot of drawings that were done back in Series 3. And he's added a few little design elements. We've stuck to the same colour scheme of the rust red and yellow gantries. And there's a few little nods back in there to the original pad, but updated with a new sort of sensibility for a slightly more modern audience and obviously slightly bigger in scale. A new feature for the Starbug hangar, which is something that I've wanted to do for a long time, which was you always saw the shots of the bug coming in and landing, and then when it took off again, it had magically turned around to fly out the same way. We've now built in the turntable, and you now in this series will finally physically see, after the bug's landed, there is a turntable that turns it around to get it back out the other way. So that's something that's been a nice little touch that I've been wanting to do for a very long time.
It's interesting when you hear NASA people and people who've been in space and so it doesn't look like that. The spaceship doesn't look like that, the Earth doesn't look like that, and there's a sort of perception in our minds of how space should look. And I know, right as when I was a kid seeing 2001, and you just think, it depends on, again, what we're doing, what the background's going to be. I mean, yeah, I normally tend to, for spaceship, have a key light, and then I'd have this thing where I put a subtle, almost at 180 degrees to it, I might put a fill in. The bane of model sometimes is the worst shape is a sphere, closely followed by a cone and then by a column, and so Starbug is a pain because it's 3 spheres, so you have to be a bit careful how you light it because a sphere will pick up other images in its shape, so that's a consideration, but it depends on the environment. I mean, you're sort of discussing with Doug what the background's going to be, because in some cases we have got continuity. In others we haven't, so the sequence of the grabber at the moment, that is a self-contained sequence for the gag, so we've sort of imposed a continuity on that. So we've got a sun hitting Starbug from the rear right engine, and then we've followed that through everything we've shot from that sequence, even at the moment that the plates and everything haven't been decided. So sometimes you're driven by the background plate, as in the desert landscape, they're predominantly lit from the left, so that's fine. In other cases we'll impose our own look. Our eyes and our brains are so skilled at picking up the slightest blemishes, streaks. You just think, you look at houses and you can see the streaks from the gutters, from a door handle, whatever, and it's that accumulation of detail on a small model. With the best will in the world, it's very hard to do it. So in certain environments, a smaller model, you know, could be even 24th scale or something, would work fine. But if you want to, as you saw us filming yesterday when we were on the larger red dwarf, that was specifically commissioned with greater detail, greater scale, and they haven't built anything on that size before. But the plus then is you can go really close with it, and if you light it and you have the detailed finishing and painting correct, you know, it stands up. And especially now, you know, whether you've got high def television, whatever, that's a consideration, you know, for all departments, that things that wouldn't have shown up 20 years ago, you know, do show up now. So a larger scale model, skating along it, you know, you're going to get the benefits from it.
We were lucky enough to have the original Red Dwarf, and basically we just times it up 3 times from the original, and just basically carried on, looked at it, saw how structurally how we could put it together, and that's how the process begins. You know, you start from there and then start from big blocks and to smaller blocks, and then you get down to the fine detail. I used to be a plumber, was always into the workings of Gerry Anderson. I've always thought one day I'd do some stuff for Gerry Anderson. Luckily I was, and did work for Gerry Anderson. And then basically all the little bits that I would find off of packaging and just various weird and wacky things that you wouldn't expect to find in normal places that look completely different from any kind of scratch built model bits. You know, we moulded them and said, right, I'll use that, I'll use this, and we just went for it from there.
Bringing a Moco rig in and the lenses with it and the operators, you know, it's expensive, but the pluses are it's repeatable. You know, it's the same technologies you'll see in robots, in car manufacturing, whatever. It's that repeatable. So the big plus, especially, you know, as you can see the model behind me, that if you're skating round that, there's a lot of details. Well, we've got to map that, we've got to sit that in space. If you're doing motion control, we can shoot the model, we can say, let's do a pass now where there's some fill on it, do a pass where there's practicals, and if we've got an issue with some of the matting we can't get with the blue screen behind me, we can come in and just do one more pass to tidy up, say, the array that goes on the front, which is quite fiddly. We can give them a good mat of that with the motion control.
Pete did a lovely job of, Doug wanted some to match the, what was it?
The grill from
grills from the original
section, yeah.
We drilled out tiny little holes because we didn't have any grill. So we just sat there and, or Pete sat there and drilled out like 70 holes.
Just went up
on
the
each
grid
sheet.
and just drilled them out.
Yeah, so Doug wanted to have this light pattern coming down, so on the smoke you can see it as a shuttle comes out, as a Starbug, sorry, comes out. These weren't on this particular model, so we had to cut through, basically drill 4 holes, cut out with a saw. These grids did it off the model, so we can get them both the same. Chain drill all the holes, just glue them over the hole, and then when the practical boys come in with the lights, it gave Doug his effect he wanted. He wanted a stream of lights coming down through the multiple holes.
We also had to build a rig that would allow us to fly the Starbug in and fly the Starbug back out. So that is a recreation of pretty much the setup we had back on season 3, which is an overhead rail system comprised of 2 scaffold poles and a trolley that runs along those poles with a cradle below it from which we can hang the Starbug miniature. Exactly what we used to do. You haul the trolley along, you set the rails at an angle, and you can get the Starbug either starting flat and taking off or coming in and landing. Knowing that we already would have that rig, Richard and Doug said then we would also like you to use that to do us a classic Starbug crash. And it was a desert landscape, and as part of the kit that I was able to bring along to the shoot, and we had a load of polyurethane foam rocks that had been left over from a previous production. Sand is relatively cheap. So I said, well, look, I think we can make you a reasonably large landscape that can still be extended via digital matte paintings, put skies in, distant hills, but at least you'll get that moment of impact and all the dynamics and the dust and all the stuff that you want from a Starbug crash. We sort of hung the Magic Camera Company bug from our rig and proceeded to trash it, and therein is another problem. Crashes inevitably smash up the Starbug. For season 3, we physically used to throw it into the set. So the bug is going to get trashed. It always does. I've built, I think, 6 over the years. But they only have one hero Starbug, and obviously it's needed for beauty shots, it's needed for promotional work, so we couldn't trash it. But they did have access to a 3D printed Starbug, which became our sacrificial stunt bug. Once we actually stuck the two side by side, hero bug and stunt bug, we could see that there were a few bits that needed a little bit of attention. So Andy and Pete from Magic Camera Company crew, they added a lot more paintwork onto it. They airbrushed up on the legs, they added a few more streaks, a bit more graphics. And then we noticed there were a couple of antennae missing from the midsection. So Rocky, with true BBC visual effects ingenuity, tracked down some drinking straws, cut them up and made up the antennae pieces on the fly. The 3D printing process is a fantastic process. It's something we didn't have back on the original series. It allows you an exact replica of the thing that's been scanned. It is, however, brittle. And as we discovered, and as I'm sure outtakes will show, we actually managed to smash the bottom of the stunt bug on take 1.
Let's try that.
Right, super glue out.
Right.
Oh, you can fix those.
And interestingly, the drinking straw antenna actually survived the crash intact, whereas the actual Starbug didn't. But they're talking about coming slightly more further front on, right? So that would help.
We didn't have to be using the Alexa. The advantage for that is you can set it in very minute settings. So if you're doing motion control, we could almost control it, in tenths of a frame. As you've just seen on the desert landscape we're shooting, that now is going into high speed. So for us it's good that it's a camera that straddles that range, so that in the one package we can slave it on a motion control rig, or we can use it as a floor camera with slow speeds right up to 120 on that particular model. There's a physical calculation, which is the square root of the scale multiplied by your base film speed, which gets a bit technical, but that's your starting point. So basically what you're doing is we're running on a smaller model at a higher speed to try and mimic what you would see real time if a real ship crashed in the desert. Your eye is so clever at picking up the world around you. So in live action, and even on the main unit footage for this, if you had a depth of field of 11 on a lens, you would be holding a large portion of what you're seeing sharp. We don't see the world that way. As I'm looking at you, I'm seeing you, but what's behind you with the wall or any warnings, whatever, that in my conscious mind is soft. And so that's what, if you're shooting live action, you want the audience to be concentrating on the actor, what the actor's doing, and be aware of what's behind you, but not dominating. We're actually doing the flip of that. We need to be able to straddle an imaginary world and making it into a perceivable world, if that makes sense. There's two things, the lenses I've chosen in particular, I use them a lot. They're Cooke S4 lenses, and I'm a huge fan of Cooke lenses because they're very sympathetic to what we do, because the nature of the lens, the focus falls off gently. They can focus pretty close as a prime lens, and they're sympathetic. So some other lenses are beautiful for what you're doing. You might be doing a pack shot or something, and the look you're after in the film, they can be crisper, and the fall off between sharp, and we're using that area. There's one point of focus, then there's a depth of field, and we're straddling that area where focus is gently falling off, so your eye hopefully isn't saying, oh, something's wrong there. If I'm standing in a desert landscape, it wouldn't look like that. So again, it locks into focus being important, and those lenses with the prime, we get a good stop on them, we get pretty good near focus, but they're sympathetic in that they ease your eye if the focus is falling off, so that it's a deliberate choice.
For all of us, for myself, for Nick and Rocky, it's quite an odd experience being back on Red Dwarf, because it's been such a big part of our career, and it's obviously where the three of us as very young, naive people coming into the effects business learnt a lot of our craft. So to be back on it again is quite spooky, because it's been 30-something years, I think, since we first all met up. What is strange, though, is not having the complete control over it that we would have had under the old regime, under the BBC Effects Department, where we used to do monsters and props and miniatures and everything, and the filming. We literally used to take it all on, but TV as an industry has changed, so it's much more broken down into individual specialisations now. So from my point of view, it's been very strange coming in and having to fly a bug that we didn't build. So I'm reliant on the other guys when it does break, or when I want something changed on it, to go, how does this come apart? And what has been nice is that both Andy and Pete have been working really well with Nick and Rocky, and I think we've managed to gel the two teams perfectly.
Seeing Starbug with Mike Tucker on the back of it, flying it, I was like, the way, you know, we all,
the banking.
we all put our heads together, and it's like, how can we do this? And it's like the whole, you know, the two sides of us, like me and Pete and Rocky and Nick and Mike,
yeah.
that we just gelled, and it was nice, wasn't it?
It
really
was.
And it was really good to see Mike steering the Starbug, and we've got some really good shots out of it.
3, 2, 1, banking.